You really shouldn't have opened that drawer, Lauren. That envelope was private for a reason. Sarah and I have been handling the details of the new expansion without you, and we intend to keep it that way. Your presence at the family cabin doesn't change the fact that you're not in the inner circle anymore. If you decide to make a scene during the gathering or tell your parents what you saw, you'll find yourself without a job and without the support you think you have. Remember, I built this company into what it is today. One word from you and everything your family holds dear could slip away. Hi, my name is Lauren Bennett. I am 30 years old. The call ended with a sharp click, and I set the phone down on the kitchen counter of the mountain cabin. My hands stayed steady, but a quiet weight settled in my chest. I had found the envelope that morning while searching the old desk drawer in the study for faded photos to use in the family slideshow. Inside were printed emails and handwritten notes between my boss, Richard Hale, and my coworker, Sarah Klein. They detailed plans to sideline me from the Nashville expansion project, reroute key client meetings, and present the whole thing as their joint vision at the next board session. The notes even mentioned keeping family distractions out of the loop. I had come to the cabin in Tennessee for our annual Bennett family gathering, the one weekend each year when everyone sets aside work and gathers under one roof. My parents, Thomas and Margaret Bennett, always hosted here. My older sister Jessica usually arrives with her husband and kids. This year, I had driven up early to help set things up, thinking it would be a chance to breathe after months of tense office dynamics. Instead, I had uncovered proof that the two people I worked with every day were actively cutting me out of the very projects that carried our family name. Richard's voice on the phone had been calm, but edged with threat. He knew I had seen the envelope. Sarah must have noticed it missing from her desk and told him. Now he was warning me to stay silent while my family was under the same roof. The core of it was simple. They wanted the credit and the control, and they were willing to erase my role to get it. I walked into the living room where the old couch still held the same faded quilt my grandmother had made. The cabin smelled of pine and the coffee I had started earlier. I sat down and let the silence settle. For 3 years, I had worked at Bennett Holdings, the company my grandfather founded and my parents still held majority shares in. Richard had been brought in as CEO 5 years ago to professionalize things. On paper, he reported to the board, but in practice, he ran daily operations with increasing independence. Sarah had joined last year as his executive assistant and quickly became his right hand on every major initiative. At first, I told myself it was normal corporate streamlining. Then the exclusions started. I stopped receiving invites to strategy sessions I had always attended. Client calls I had built relationships for were reassigned. When I asked Richard directly, he smiled and said I was too valuable in my current lane and should focus on execution rather than vision. Sarah would nod along, her expression sympathetic, but never offering to loop me in. The pattern felt familiar in a way that hurt more than I wanted to admit. Growing up, family decisions about the company had always happened at the dinner table or during these cabin weekends. I had been included in the conversations even as a teenager. Now the same kind of quiet exclusion was happening at work, and the person driving it was the man my parents trusted to lead the company they built. I opened my laptop and checked the shared calendar. Sure enough, a new meeting had been added for tomorrow morning, titled Nashville Expansion, Core Team Only. My name was not on the attendee list. Sarah's and Richard's were. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the pines swayed in the late afternoon light. My sister Jessica's car would arrive in a few hours. My parents were due tomorrow morning. The neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had already stopped by to say hello and mention he had seen a dark sedan parked near the back access road earlier in the week. He had thought it was odd because the cabin was supposed to be empty until the gathering. I did not mention the envelope or the call. Instead, I asked him how his garden was doing and thanked him for keeping an eye on the place. He left after a few minutes, but his comment stayed with me. A dark sedan. Richard drove a dark sedan. That evening, I checked the cabin security system. The cameras were old but still functional, mostly pointed at the driveway and the front porch. I scrolled through the recent footage on the small monitor in the utility room. 2 nights earlier, at 11:17 p.m., the same dark sedan had pulled up to the side of the cabin. Richard stepped out. Sarah followed a moment later. They walked to the back deck, talked for several minutes, then left. The footage was grainy, but it was clearly them. They had met here on family property while I was still in the city finishing a report Richard had assigned me. I saved a copy of the clip to my phone and turned the monitor off. My chest felt tight, but I did not cry. I had learned a long time ago that tears did not change what people chose to do. Instead, I made a simple decision. I would not confront Richard or Sarah while my family was here. I would not turn the gathering into a battlefield. But I also would not pretend the threat did not exist. The next morning, my parents arrived. My mother hugged me tightly and asked how work was going. I told her it was busy and left it at that. My father asked about the Nashville project in passing. I said Richard and Sarah seemed to have it under control. He nodded, satisfied. Jessica arrived with her 2 kids and immediately started organizing the kitchen. The house filled with voices and the smell of chili on the stove. For a few hours, it felt like the old version of our family, the one where everyone had a seat at the table and the company was something we all protected together. During dinner, the conversation turned to the business. My father mentioned how proud he was that Richard had secured the new Nashville client. Jessica added that she had heard the expansion was going to be a game changer. No one mentioned my name or the work I had done on the initial pitch. I passed the cornbread and smiled when someone looked at me. Inside, the exclusion landed exactly where Richard had intended it to land. Quiet, personal, and impossible to call out without sounding petty. After the meal, I stepped onto the back deck for air. Mr. Thompson was walking his dog along the tree line. He waved and called out, "Saw that same dark car again last night, parked down by the old logging road. Thought you folks might want to know." I thanked him and went back inside. The comment was small, but it confirmed what the footage had shown. Richard and Sarah were using the cabin as a meeting place when they thought no one would be here. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone. I had the saved footage and the printed notes from the envelope. I also had 3 years of meeting notes and client emails that showed my contributions to the very projects Richard and Sarah were now claiming. I did not send anything yet. I simply organized the files into a single folder and named it Truth. Then I closed the laptop and went to sleep. The next day, the family went hiking. I stayed behind, saying I had a work call. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the property and checked the cameras again. Nothing new appeared. When the family returned, laughing and muddy, I helped make sandwiches and listened to the kids' stories about the trail. Jessica pulled me aside at one point and asked if everything was okay at the office. I told her it was complicated. She nodded but did not push. That was her way, kind but not intrusive. Richard called again that evening. This time, his tone was smoother. He said he hoped I was enjoying the family time and that we could clear the air when I got back to the office. I told him I would be in on Monday and hung up. I did not mention the footage or the neighbor's comment. I did not need to. The fact that he was calling at all told me he was worried. On Sunday morning, before everyone packed up to leave, my cousin Emily arrived. She lived 2 hours away and usually came for the last day of the gathering. Emily worked in accounting at a different firm and had always been the quiet observer in our family. She found me on the deck and asked how I was really doing. I told her the truth in short sentences. Richard and Sarah were cutting me out of projects they had met here at the cabin, and Richard had threatened my job if I spoke up. Emily listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You have the footage and the notes. That is not nothing." Then she added, "If you decide to do something with it, you will not be alone." She did not offer to fix it or tell me what to do. She simply let me know she saw what was happening. We drove back to the city that afternoon in separate cars. The cabin felt smaller in the rearview mirror. I did not know what Monday would bring, but I knew I would not walk into the office pretending nothing had changed. The envelope had done its work. The security footage had done its work. The neighbor's casual comment had done its work. The family gathering had shown me exactly how far the exclusion had already spread. I reached my apartment, unpacked, and placed the folder labeled Truth on my desk. Then I sat on the couch and let the quiet of the empty room settle around me. The anger was there, but it was steady rather than explosive. I had been excluded from meetings, from credit, from conversations that shaped the company my family built. Now the same people were using family property as their private meeting spot and threatening me to stay silent. The carefully built myth of a united family business had cracked open in that drawer. I did not know yet what I would do with the files. I only knew I would not let Richard or Sarah decide the ending for me. The choice, whatever it turned out to be, would be mine. Monday morning arrived with the same gray light that always filtered through the office windows. I walked in at 7:30, earlier than usual, and set the folder labeled Truth inside my locked bottom drawer before anyone else arrived. Sarah was already at her desk outside Richard's office. She looked up, offered the same bright smile she gave clients, and said good morning as if the phone call at the cabin had never happened. I returned the greeting and kept walking. Richard summoned me before I had even opened my email. When I stepped into his office, Sarah was already seated in the chair across from his desk. She crossed her legs and folded her hands in her lap, the picture of professional calm. Richard leaned back in his leather chair and gestured for me to sit. "Lauren," he began, voice smooth, "I wanted to follow up on our conversation from the weekend. The Nashville expansion is moving faster than expected, and the core team needs to stay focused. Sarah and I have been carrying the heavy lifting on the client side these past few weeks. We think it makes sense for you to step back from the day-to-day on this one and concentrate on the Midwest accounts you already know well." The words were polite. The meaning was not. He was removing me from the project I had helped originate, the one my father still referenced at the dinner table as Lauren's big win. I kept my hands flat on my thighs so they would not shake. "I originated the initial outreach to the Nashville group," I said. "My notes are in the shared drive. Removing me now will create gaps for the client." Richard smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "That's exactly why we need you on the Midwest side. You have strong relationships there. Nashville is a new market. Sarah has been building the relationships on the ground. We don't want to confuse the client with too many voices." Sarah nodded once, as if this had been her idea all along. "It really is about clarity, Lauren. You'll still be looped in on high-level updates." I looked at her. High-level updates were never the issue. I was on every strategy call until 2 months ago. Richard's tone sharpened just enough to cut. 2 months ago, you were still proving you could handle the volume. Now the volume has increased. We're making a structural adjustment. This isn't personal. It was entirely personal. The envelope I had found proved they had planned the exclusion weeks earlier. The security footage from the cabin proved they had met on family property to discuss it. I did not say any of that. I simply asked, will this change be reflected in my performance review? Richard glanced at Sarah, then back at me. Performance reviews are about results, not feelings. If the Midwest numbers stay strong, there won't be any issues. If they slip, we'll have a different conversation. I stood, understood. As I turned to leave, he added one more line, voice low and almost kind. Your family has a lot riding on this company staying stable. I'd hate for any distractions to affect that stability. The threat was not subtle. He was reminding me that my parents still held shares and that any conflict could reach them. I closed the door behind me without answering. Back at my desk, I opened the shared drive and discovered my access to the Nashville folder had already been restricted. A new subfolder titled Core Team Only required additional permissions I no longer held. I took a screenshot, saved it to the same drawer as the envelope, and closed the window. At lunch, I met my cousin Emily at a small cafe 2 blocks from the office. She had taken a long lunch break from her own accounting firm. We sat at a corner table away from the windows. I told her what Richard had said and what had changed in the drive. She listened without interrupting the way she always had during family gatherings when the adults talked over the kids. When I finished, she stirred her coffee and said, "He's trying to isolate you before you can show anyone the files. If your father hears only Richard's version first, the story gets set." I nodded. I know. I just don't want to drag my parents into it during what's supposed to be their retirement from daily decisions. Emily looked at me across the table. They retired from daily decisions. They didn't retire from caring whether their daughter is being pushed out of the company they built. She paused, then added, "Michael Torres asked me yesterday if everything was okay with you. He said he noticed your name missing from the expansion list and that the timeline in the old emails doesn't match what Richard is telling people." Michael Torres was a junior analyst who had started 6 months earlier. He sat 2 rows over from me and rarely spoke in meetings unless asked. I had not realized he paid attention to who was included or excluded. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "That he should talk to you directly if he has questions about the timeline," Emily said. He seemed relieved. "I think he's been sitting on his own notes for weeks." We finished lunch without making any plans. Emily simply said, "Whatever you decide, I'm here if you need a second set of eyes on the documents." Then she went back to her office and I went back to mine. The rest of the afternoon passed in small, deliberate exclusions. An all-hands video call was scheduled for 3 o'clock. The invite listed every senior member of the team except me. I watched the recording later that evening from my apartment. Richard stood at the front of the conference room with Sarah beside him and announced the Nashville expansion as a partnership between myself and Sarah that will define the next chapter for Bennett Holdings. He thanked the broader team for their support, but never named anyone else. The chat filled with congratulatory emojis. No one asked why I was absent. After the call ended, I received an email from Richard's assistant, not from Richard himself. It informed me that my calendar access to certain recurring strategy meetings had been changed to optional to reduce meeting fatigue. The language was corporate and bloodless. The result was that I would no longer be notified when the real decisions were made. I sat at my kitchen table with the laptop open and the folder from the drawer beside it. The printed notes from the envelope, the cabin footage, the screenshots of restricted access, and now the recording of the all-hands call sat in neat digital rows. Together, they told a clear story. Richard and Sarah had spent months removing me from the work that mattered while using my family's name and property as cover. My phone lit up with a text from my father. He rarely texted during the week. "Richard called this afternoon, said he's concerned about your bandwidth and wants to make sure you're not stretched too thin. Everything all right on your end?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing a short reply. "Everything is fine. Just focusing on Midwest accounts right now." I did not add that Richard had already removed me from the accounts that actually mattered. I did not tell him about the envelope, or the footage, or the fact that Sarah had been in our family cabin at 11 at night. The words felt heavy, even as I sent them. The myth my parents still carried that the company was one unified family effort remained intact for them. Richard was counting on that. Later that evening, Michael Torres sent a message through the company chat. It was after hours, and the message was brief. I have the original client intake notes from January if you need them. The dates don't match what was presented today. Let me know. I did not answer immediately. I saved the message and added it to the growing folder. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the kitchen light, and sat in the dark for a while. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city moved on without any knowledge of what had happened inside one family's company. I thought about the cabin, about the dinner table where no one had said my name when the expansion came up, about Mr. Thompson's offhand comment about the dark sedan, about Emily's steady voice at lunch, and now about Michael's quiet offer of evidence. The exclusions were no longer just professional. They were reaching into the spaces that used to feel safe. Richard wanted me silent and sidelined. He had made that clear in his office in the changed access and the call to my father. What he did not know was that every step he took to isolate me was also creating a record I could no longer ignore. I picked up my phone again and opened the folder one more time. The files were still there. The footage from the cabin still played when I tapped it. I watched Richard and Sarah walk across the back deck in grainy black and white. Then I closed the file. Monday had shown me exactly how far the plan had already gone. Tuesday, I decided, would be the day I stopped letting Richard set the pace. Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office with the folder in my bag. I placed it in the locked drawer again, but kept the key in my pocket instead of my desk. Michael Torres appeared at my cubicle just after 9, holding a printed stack of old emails. He glanced around before speaking. "These are the original intake notes from the Nashville client last January," he said quietly. "Your name is on every version until March. The ones Richard circulated last week have it removed. I kept the originals because the dates mattered for my own tracking. I took the stack and flipped through the first few pages. My initials and comments were there, clear as day. 'Thank you,' I said. 'This helps.' Michael hesitated. 'If you need someone to confirm the timeline in writing, I will. I've watched this happen before with other people here. It never stops unless someone says something.' He went back to his desk without waiting for an answer. I added the emails to the folder and closed the drawer. Richard called me into his office again at 10:30. Sarah was not there this time. He closed the door and stayed standing behind his desk. 'I heard you met with Michael Torres this morning,' he said. The words were casual, but the tone was not. He's a junior analyst. He doesn't understand how decisions get made at this level. I stayed standing too. He understands dates on documents. That's all I asked him about. Richard's expression hardened. 'You're making this personal when it doesn't have to be. Your father already knows I have concerns about your focus. If you keep pulling junior staff into side conversations, those concerns will only grow.' The jab landed exactly where he aimed it, straight at the family tie that still mattered to me. I kept my voice even. 'I'm not pulling anyone into anything. I'm confirming facts that affect work I originated. If that creates concerns, the board can review the original files.' He stepped around the desk and lowered his voice. 'The board listens to me. Your parents listen to me. You can keep collecting your little folder, but it won't change the outcome. The expansion moves forward without you. The only question is whether you leave quietly or force everyone to watch you make a scene.' I looked at him for a moment. The man standing in front of me had sat at our family dinner table twice a year for the last 5 years. He had toasted my grandfather's legacy and called the company a family effort. Now he was telling me the family would side with him. 'I'm not making a scene,' I said. 'I'm setting a boundary. I won't be removed from work I did without a record of why.' Richard gave a short, cold laugh. 'Boundaries. That's what people say when they know they've already lost. I left his office without answering. Back at my desk, I opened my email and drafted a short message to Patricia Lang, the board chair who had worked with my grandfather for 20 years. I had only spoken with her a handful of times, mostly at annual meetings. I attached a one-page summary of the timeline, the restricted access, and the original emails Michael had given me. I did not attach the cabin footage yet. I simply wrote that I wanted the board to have the facts before any further changes to my role were finalized. I sent it at 11:15. By noon, I had a reply from Patricia's assistant asking if I could join a brief call at 2. I accepted. The call was short. Patricia listened without interrupting while I walked through the dates and the access changes. When I finished, she said Richard has presented a different picture. I would like to see the full set of documents you mentioned. Can you send them this afternoon? I told her I would. After the call ended, I forwarded the entire folder, including the cabin footage and the neighbor's comment I had noted down. Then I sat back and waited. Richard must have been notified almost immediately. At 3 o'clock, he appeared at my desk, face tight. "You went over my head," he said. The sarcasm was gone. That was a mistake. "I went to the board with facts," I answered. "You can do the same." He leaned in slightly. "Your parents are going to hear about this. When they do, they'll ask why their daughter is trying to damage the company they built. Think carefully about what story you want them to believe." I met his eyes. They can believe the story with the original emails and the footage from the cabin, or they can believe yours. Either way, I'm done pretending the exclusions aren't happening. He straightened. "You're resigning." "I'm setting a boundary," I said again. "I won't stay in a role where my contributions are erased and my access is revoked for asking questions. I'll send formal notice by end of day." Richard turned and walked away without another word. I spent the next hour writing a short resignation letter. I addressed it to Patricia Lang and copied Richard. I stated that effective immediately, I was stepping down to protect my own work and the integrity of projects I had built. I attached the same folder I had sent the board. Then I printed 2 copies, signed one, and placed it on Richard's desk while he was in a meeting. When I returned to my desk, Michael Torres was waiting with a small box. "I thought you might need this for your things," he said. His voice was low. "I also saved copies of the original client files on a drive if anyone asks later, just in case." I thanked him and packed the few personal items I kept at the office, a photo of the cabin at sunset, a notebook from my first year, and a small plant my mother had given me. It took less than 10 minutes. No one came to say goodbye except Michael, who simply nodded once before going back to his desk. I walked out of the building at 4:15. The afternoon light on the sidewalk felt ordinary. My phone rang as I reached my car. It was my mother. "Lauren, Richard just called your father. He said you resigned and that you're making serious accusations. What is going on?" I sat in the driver's seat with the door open. I found evidence that Richard and Sarah have been excluding me from projects for months and using the cabin as a place to meet privately. I showed the board. I resigned because I won't work that way anymore. There was a long pause. "Your father is upset. He thinks you should have come to us first." "I tried to handle it inside the company," I said. "It didn't work. I'm sending you and Dad the same files I sent the board. You can decide what you believe." Another pause. "We'll look at them, but this is going to change things for the family." "I know," I said. "It already has." I drove home, parked, and carried the box upstairs. The apartment was quiet. I set the box on the kitchen table and opened the folder on my laptop one last time. The files were still there. The footage still played. I watched it once more, then closed it and moved the entire folder to an external drive I kept in a safe drawer. Over the next week, the board met without me. Patricia Lang sent a company-wide email announcing my departure and thanking me for my contributions to several key accounts. She did not mention Richard or Sarah by name, but the wording made it clear the board had reviewed documentation. Richard's title remained, but the Nashville expansion was paused, pending further review. Sarah was reassigned to a different department 2 weeks later. My parents called again after they read the files. My father's voice was tired. We trusted Richard. We didn't see this. My mother asked if I wanted to come back to the cabin for a weekend to talk. I told them I needed some time first. The invitation was still open, but the easy rhythm of those gatherings had already shifted. We would still be family, but the company conversations at the dinner table would never feel the same. Emily came over one evening with takeout. We sat on the couch and she asked how I was sleeping. I told her better than I had in months. Michael Torres texted once to say the junior team had noticed the change in access policies and that a couple of them had started keeping their own records. I thanked him and wished him well. I did not look for another job in the same industry right away. Instead, I spent the first month organizing the notes and photos from the cabin into a proper album. It felt like reclaiming something small that had been taken without permission. The family myth of seamless unity around the business had been carefully protected for years. Once the envelope came out of the drawer, that protection was gone. I had not destroyed it on purpose. I had simply stopped pretending it was still intact. Richard never called me again. Sarah sent one short email apologizing for any misunderstanding and asking if I would be willing to speak. I did not reply. The boundary I had set was not about punishment. It was about not letting anyone else decide what parts of my work and my family's story belonged to me. 3 months later, I received a letter from Patricia Lang. The board had completed its review. Richard remained CEO, but with stricter oversight on major projects. The Nashville expansion had been reassigned to a different team. She wrote that the documentation I provided had been essential and that the company owed me a debt of clarity. I read the letter once, then filed it with the rest of the evidence. I did not need it framed on a wall. I only needed to know it existed. The annual gathering at the cabin happened again the following spring. I went for 1 day instead of the whole weekend. My parents were warmer than I expected. Jessica asked careful questions about what I was doing now. Emily sat beside me on the deck for a long time without saying much. Mr. Thompson waved from the tree line and called out that the dark sedan had not been back. I smiled and waved back. That night, I drove home before sunset. The road curved through the pines the same way it always had. The cabin grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared around a bend. I did not feel grief for the old version of things. I felt the quiet weight of having chosen myself when the choice mattered. Richard and Sarah had tried to erase my place in the work my family built. They had used private meetings on family property and quiet threats about my parents' trust. They had succeeded in removing me from the day-to-day. What they had not succeeded in doing was making me doubt what I had seen or what I was willing to protect. The boundary I set cost me the easy routines of those gatherings and the daily involvement in the company. It also gave me back the ability to sleep without wondering what else was being decided without me. I still have the external drive with the folder. I have not opened it in months. I do not need to. The truth is no longer something I have to carry every day. It is simply something I know. Thank you for listening to my story. If you were in my position and discovered your boss and a coworker had been quietly cutting you out of the work that carried your family's name, what would you have done with the evidence?